This is the Life at Work Conference podcast, an initiative of City Bible Forum.
Hi, I'm Andrew Laird, host of the Life at Work Conference podcast, where we meet real workers wrestling with real workplace issues. Today, from working in a menswear store in South Auckland to running 6 companies over 20 years, the story of one man and how his faith has shaped his work.
And then I heard later the conversation that these two had and he said, you need to know something. He's a Christian. He said, I thought I saw something. There was kind of a bit of weird stuff in the background there. And he said, but it's okay. It's okay. What it means is he'll do what he said he's going to do, and he genuinely cares and wants you to succeed.
My guest today is leadership advisor Mark Bilton. I'm Andrew Laird, and this is the Life at Work Conference podcast. Well, Mark Bilton has had a diverse and exciting business career, one which has been profoundly shaped by his Christian faith. But it hasn't always been that way. Growing up in a non-Christian home, starting his working life in sales in a fairly rough part of South Auckland. How has God played a role in his work life to bring him to where he is today, encouraging Christians to deeply integrate their faith with their work, as well as running a company training the next generation of leaders? So to explore all of that and much, much more, welcome to the podcast, Mark Bilton.
Hey, Andrew. Good to see you.
Mark, it's wonderful to chat with you and to hear something of your story, the journey that God has taken you on, and then what you are doing in particular today. But let's just go back to those early days in New Zealand. You live in Australia now and have for a number of years, but you did a lot of your growing up across the Tasman. So tell us about home life for you as a child, the area that you grew up in, and how you ended up in your first job.
Sure. Well, I was actually born in the UK. So, born in the UK, raised in New Zealand, but an Australian by choice. So moved here about 15, 16 years ago. But yeah, spent a good deal of my growing years, certainly mid-late teens, through to up to about 15, 16 years ago in New Zealand. Lived in South Auckland. Was raised in a military family. So my dad was in the British Army and then moved to New Zealand, joined the New Zealand Army. I had 3 brothers, and my mother was a midwife, and it was a moderately dysfunctional upbringing, probably is the polite way to say it. Like it was, we weren't raised in a Christian environment, weren't a particularly loving family. It was a little bit of a brutal upbringing. Better than a lot, but not as good as others. So it was not an easy time for a child being raised in that family, and probably a product of generational influence. My father was very much a product of how he was raised, and passed that through.
And so given that sort of upbringing, were there particular passions or interests that you had that you sort of thought, after school, I'd love to study in this area, go into that line of work?
Not really. I was sort of a bit of an angry young man, so living a fairly dysfunctional life. And you asked about my first role was in a menswear store, and that was quite a bit of an escape. Actually, it was good to go there. Some good guys there, and met some great people. We used to sort of play hard, party hard, and work hard.
Yep.
And stayed in that menswear store right the way through. Actually, from school, left home pretty much as soon as I could, then through university, and even after university stayed in that menswear store. So I always had a bit of a passion for fashion, and there was a good fun crew there.
Yeah. And so obviously there wasn't some clear sitting down and thinking about my future and this is where I want to go. It's almost a, what can I do to escape from the other areas of life, and this is a good spot for me to be. But obviously, you are a Christian person now, so tell us in light of that background and that upbringing, how did you come to Christian faith?
Very reluctantly, Andrew. Yeah, you're right. There wasn't a lot of thinking going on, but ended up at university, leading this sort of fairly self-destructive lifestyle. As I said, kind of angry young man. and kind of looking for love and acceptance in areas that are not that productive. And then at university, I started meeting Christians, and they were everywhere. I couldn't cross the quad at the university, couldn't go to a party. My girlfriend became a Christian. It all got out of control. And
you feel like you were being circled at that point. It sounds like
I was being hounded, absolutely hammered. It was. I remember walking down Queen Street in Auckland one day, and this little Maori guy was on the other side of the road, and I just caught his eye, and he runs across the road and sticks his finger in my face and says, "Jesus loves you, mate." And I'm just going, what is going on? It was just wild, and I did not respond well to the gospel, and sort of bit back a bit. So if you're ever sharing Jesus with people and they start getting a bit frothy at you, it's probably a good sign.
Okay.
So look, I had about 2 years of this constant encounter with people who'd had these life transforming experiences, and I really didn't want to know, but as I got more and more self-destructive and got to the stage where I was thinking about checking out, one night I was at home and again sort of contemplating whether I wanted to be alive, and these messages kept coming back into my head about this Jesus that I didn't know, this God that apparently loved me, and something resonated, and I made a choice that night. I said, well, Lord, if you can do something with my life, then let's do that. So I gave my life to the Lord, and it wasn't all bells and whistles, and it certainly wasn't. I hadn't stepped inside a church at this point, and so had this overwhelming sense of peace and love, and began to discover a loving Heavenly Father, and started that journey of endeavouring to follow Jesus and build a relationship with Him and understand who He is and what He wanted from my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I mean, obviously, such a transformative experience for you, that coming to faith, and as you say, beginning to build a life of living with Jesus as your Lord. I want to think particularly about living with Jesus as your Lord when it comes to your work. Were there any significant changes initially to how you approached your work because of this newfound faith?
Probably not initially. I mean, it was. I guess two things come to mind. First of all, not being raised in the church, I didn't realise you were meant to separate all those things, and that God's interested in some things and not in others. So I assumed that if I given my life to Him, that meant everything, like work, career, life. It wasn't only my Saviour, as my Lord. It's like, what are we doing today? Where are we going? How does this whole thing work? But as I went down that sort of discovery path. For me, it was just an all-in. So everything was on the table. I gave my whole life to Him. Relationships, who I'd spend time with, my work. There wasn't church at that point, but so it was just a sort of one-on-one with Him. But as I started meeting Christians and started getting plugged into church and meeting other people who had a similar experience. I did actually bump into a lot of people who kind of were a little confused about whether work came under the God is interested category or not, which sort of surprised me a little bit. I assumed that, if you gave your life to the Lord, then the work piece was an important part of that. But so it grew over time, I think, is probably the better way to. It wasn't certainly an instant kind of revelation.
But it sounds as though you certainly, at the outset, it just made sense for you that your Christian faith integrated with and connected with your Christian faith, and it wasn't really until others perhaps questioned that you began to think otherwise. As you say there, it has grown and developed over time. So what was significant in that growth in understanding of how your faith would integrate with your work?
Well, it was never a question for me. I think that's probably the way to look at it. So I didn't sort of discover it. It was just it wasn't excluded on the basis of any kind of Christian perspective. met Jesus, he was Lord. So where and what he wanted me to do as far as work was concerned was always going to be a part of that. So, I believe that every believer is in full-time ministry, regardless of what we're doing. A few of us are called, a very small few, are called to work in the institution, in the church itself, in its various guises. But most of us are in other kinds of work. But I think those callings are no less sacred. So if you're a plumber, God's calling you to be a plumber. That's where He's placed you. Then you're God's plumber, and that's as sacred a calling as the Archbishop.
I love that, and we'll come to that idea of calling and some of the work that you do these days in just a moment. But look, let's fast forward a few years. You started out in that menswear store, but you have moved into a number of managing director roles, perhaps most well known as the group managing director of Gloria Jean's Coffees for a period of time. So how did God lead this guy with that difficult, challenging upbringing, angry young teenager, starting out in a menswear store, into these kind of roles of leadership?
Well, you don't go from the rough parts of South Auckland, working as a shop assistant at a menswear store with a zoology degree, and end up running multinational companies without a significant amount of divine intervention. So, I have been able to do what I've been able to do because of the doors that He's opened. And so I came up through the sales and marketing side. So I was a sales rep for a jean company, and then a sales agent for a textile business, then a sales manager, GM small business. That turned around. I kind of got into the leadership side. There, went back to university, did MBAs and things. So actually, while I was doing what I was doing, I was learning how I should be doing it. But he opened a number of distinctive doors that moved me into areas of leadership, and then for my sins put me in charge of Gloria Jean's for a while. It was a tough gig. I was there for a very short period of time, really, just for a couple of years, but there to do the turnaround. Most of my leadership background has been in transformational change and bringing a lot of change to organisations that are sort of fundamentally broken. So I've usually got the Mission Impossible things, and that business at that time was really struggling in all sorts of trouble. So 2 years there to do the turnaround, and then shortly after I left, the business sold.
You mentioned there that idea of learning on the job, really, in those positions of leadership. So it's a personal question in some ways, but in those early years where you found yourself in leadership roles, what were some of the inevitable mistakes that you made? But how did you handle them? How did your Christian faith help you handle them? And what sort of things did you learn from them?
Never made a mistake, Andrew. It was all went,
I was very presumptuous of me, wasn't it? Sorry, I didn't mean to presume, but assuming for a moment that maybe there were a few little missteps along the way.
Might have been one or two on the journey. Look, there's quite a few things come to mind. Look, one of the things I'm a bit impatient, so I really like to get things done in a hurry. My Gallup Strength Finder says that strategic and competitive are my two top strengths. So it's good when you're running a big company, and not so good when you're playing a 12-year-old at Monopoly. So I had to learn to constrain my enthusiasm and my competitive nature sometimes, and I had to do that. I think particularly in leadership, where I just want to move fast, and learned over the years that if you want to be successful, you probably want to take one or two people with you. You can charge over the nearest hill, and there's a great sound of people circling wagons behind you. So taking people, I made that mistake on and off a few times. Just want to move too fast, a bit impatient, and I just need to take the time, gather the troops, lots of transparency, lots of engagement, and make sure that we're all heading in the same direction. Take the time to do that. So that's probably it. And the other thing I think is I've had a healthy disrespect for authority that's probably not that healthy. So often I've been able to really galvanize a team and get it going in the right direction, but forgotten about shareholders and boards and those things. So I've had to learn over the years to be a bit more diplomatic and engaging at that level.
Sure. We'll read between the lines there.
Yeah.
Look, Mark, you mentioned there needing to learn to be transparent and engage with people and take people with you. I'm thinking about one of your leadership roles where Gloria Jeans, it's a massive organisation. I think at the time, something like 800 stores in 40 countries. Who knows how many employees? You can probably tell me. How does your faith shape the way you lead in that instance where it is such a big organisation and you're wanting to take people with you, engage with people, but presumably you cannot have one-on-one conversations with everyone, but you want to have an impact that which really reaches into positively the lives of everyone who is employed there. How do you go about navigating that as a Christian?
Again, I don't tend to separate those things, but I think at the fundamental core of Christianity is treating others as you want to be treated. We sometimes a bit glib about that. I mean, certainly it was a revolution when Jesus started doing that and broke down gender, race, social standing, he broke a lot of those constructs. But at the core of that, I think, was honouring and respecting every individual as you would like to be treated yourself. And so that's my approach. So whether you're chairman of the board or whether you're working in the warehouse, as far as I'm concerned, you get the same amount of respect and honour and dignity. And I've found that is not that common. And so that tends to engender a level of loyalty and commitment and engagement. Gloria Jeans was big and broken, so lots of complexity, lots of layers of complexity, and lots of things going wrong. So taking the time to open that up to all stakeholders so everybody realised exactly what the issues were. So we spent some time really getting very transparent around what the core problems were. Articulating the strategy in a very simple way. We literally had a one-page strategy. Once that was built, we had a one-page strategy that was communicated to all stakeholders. So whether you were a team, banks, franchise partners, etc., we went out with one strategy. So there was lots of connection, lots of communication, lots of transparency, and very authentic. Like, I'm the new guy. I don't know this. I don't know that. Tell me about that. Like, what's the issue here? I actually jumped on a plane and went and visited 400 franchise partners, which was a riot. I mean, they were quite rightly not in a good state of mind. And so understanding them as the most important stakeholders in the organisation, where they were at, what the issues were, and how we could start moving forward from there became a key part of the strategic platform. So within 18 months, we increased the average franchise partner's profitability by 25%. Sales were going back at 5%, got that going forward at 5%, mainly off the back of not only new programs, but a big chunk of those franchise partners who engaged with us and helped build some of the solutions. High degrees of communication, authenticity, transparency, treating people with respect, taking the time to listen. Hard to do on scale, but can be done.
Yeah, as you were speaking there, I was thinking, what does that look like in practice? But that example that you give there of visiting 400 franchisees, I mean, that inevitably would come at some sort of personal cost to yourself, not least your time, but it would do what I guess you're describing there in terms of seeking to listen, but also demonstrate that everyone in the organisation is valued, a person made in the image of God.
Absolutely. We might have different roles and responsibilities due to skill sets, and they might be rarer and maybe rewarded more. But the value is the same. We're all created in the image of God.
Mark, I think I know how you're probably going to answer this next one, or some of the ways that you might answer it, given what you said before about just never having seen that distinction between your Christian faith and your work. But how have you sought to be real and honest about the faith that you have? in the various roles that you've had throughout your working career. Nail your colours to the wall, so to speak, with your colleagues, with your employees, and share something of that with them.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to realise that most of the people that we bump into during our working day, for the vast majority of us, won't walk into a church. So we're the only opportunity they get to see, hear, and experience the kingdom of God. And we represent a kingdom. So I think, if you turn up to your morning tea with your 4-kilo Bible, it's not going to go well. You're probably going to end up in front of HR, and it's not going to be that effective. So, we need to kind of rethink how we do that. Firstly, if you believe God has placed you in your workplace, there's things that he wants you to do there. So there's a whole bunch of commercial, operational kind of things, because he's, funnily enough, interested in those, which can be a bit surprising. But he's also, wanting us to connect and engage with those around us in a way that honours him. So in the organisation, are we the issue, or are we the ones that solve the problem? Either we ones that gossip, or are we ones that just join in the culture and really provide some of the solutions? Are we the first to arrive or the first to leave? There's a level of people watch us, they see us, and there is a big chunk of our witness that is not spoken. But we do have to speak. I think, we do have to share the gospel. We do have to tell people about Jesus. But I take great comfort in the fact that God is more interested in that than I am, and he will provide me the opportunities, if I'm listening, convicts people of the truth. And we just need to be mindful and hearing from him every day.
I love the way you put that, Mark. That's lovely. Look, Mark, it's been wonderful, the stories that you've been sharing so far from your own experience, your wisdom as well too. But when we come back, what I want to do is explore some of the work that you do today, both in leadership development and encouraging Christians in their life and in their witness in the workplace. So more of that with Mark in just a moment.
Loving this podcast? Then don't miss the next Life at Work conference, Saturday, February 18th, 2023. Wherever you are around Australia or the world, join us as we consider the future of work, how to love your colleagues and share Jesus in an ever-changing landscape. You can watch alone, host a watch party, or join others at a local hub. Tickets are on sale now at citybibleforum.org/Life at Work conference.
Well, welcome back. Mark, we're going to come to your two main areas of work in just a moment. But before we do, a little bit of trivia about how I first encountered you and your work. It was a few years ago now, back in 2013, and I was sitting beside a pool on holidays on the New South Wales mid-north coast, and I had taken on holidays with me this great little book called Monday Matters by a certain Mark Bilton. I like to spend my holidays reading about work. That's just the kind of guy that I am. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about this book that you wrote and why you wrote it.
That's great, Andrew. You're one of three people who've read that book, so that's a great encouragement to me.
Well, maybe a few more might read it now that we've given it a mention. But tell us more about it.
Yeah, look, it was. I kept getting asked by people about, you talk about faith and work and this sort of integrated mindset that you have. Can you tell us a bit more about it? So I started a few emails, and that kind of grew, and so there's always momentum on, and a lot of people wanted to know about it. And I thought I should probably, rather than just putting out random thoughts, really start to think about how do we engage at work in a bit more of a holistic kind of manner. So just kind of think it through a bit. And my theological training is non-existent, so it's really out of my life experience. So it's kind of it's probably full of heresies, but that I can live with that. That's fine. But a lot of people seem to get something out of it, which is very, very encouraging. And I was actually going through a reasonably difficult time. So I'd finished a role, GFC had hit. It wasn't a pleasant time for me, and I was kind of wrestling with my own theology and experience with God at the time. It's been quite challenged. So there's a bit of cathartic trying to drill down into my own experience and theology around work, because things hadn't gone quite in the way that I expected, as often occurs in life. So this was partly for me, and partly for others, but it brought it down to a nice, succinct, hey, if you're interested in this idea that God might be interested in your work. How does that actually practically play out?
And I think I certainly, my recollection of it is not heresy, but rather that practical wisdom that you've been already sharing with us. And I think that's what I found so valuable about it, that in the sweep of literature about Christians in the workplace, the practical wisdom and the everyday experience that you had, that I could seek to try and glean wisdom from for myself. And really that segues what you've shared just there very nicely into what I want to talk about next. And that is an organisation that you formed in 2009, I guess around that GFC period that you alluded to there, called Call to Business. And you've used that expression of God calling us to certain roles, calling us to be a plumber already in this podcast. And that organisation, I'll quote your website here, aims to encourage and equip Christians to be effective at work. So tell us, Mike, what do you think effectiveness looks like for a Christian in the workplace?
Firstly, I think just recognising that God's interested in what we do every day. It sounds like such a simple thing, but we don't tend to think about God on a Wednesday afternoon. And it's a bit of a revelation. But I think in its fullest form, it's about exercising our gifts. It's about serving those around us, growing in our walk with Him. I don't know about you, but you might have found work challenging from time to time. We kind of get parked
occasionally.
Parked next to some interesting people. So there's an element of understanding God uses work to help us, shape us, grow us, as well as provide for us. It's learning. I think it's about learning to be connected to God, hearing from Him in the workplace, which is not talked about often, but it's been a big part of my experience right the way through. And recognizing that it's ministry. And we get the same kit bag as a missionary or a pastor, and some of the more spiritual things we think about. We should expect, the anointing of God, His favour. That we should pray for those things. We should expect people to come to the Lord in the workplace, and His insights, His wisdom. There's a whole area of creativity and worship, I think, that we don't tend to connect with the workplace.
You mentioned there, Mark, hearing from God in the workplace, and that it's something we don't actually talk about a lot. Well, talk about it for us for a moment then. Unpack that a little bit more for us. What do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, it's a big topic. Look, first of all, I think we have to be open to hear. I think God talks to us all the time. We're just not open to hearing it. He can talk to us in the conversations. He can talk to us as we have our quiet time. We read something in the scriptures that sort of really comes alive to us. It can be that still, quiet voice, that thought in the back of our mind, like, you might have someone on your mind that you haven't thought of for a while, going, maybe God's saying something, picking up the phone, talking to them, wrestling with that difficult work opportunity and waiting for some inspiration to sort of download from heaven. The Bible is full of people hearing from heaven, and yet it's not talked about, or if it is talked about, it's kind of a little kind of spooky and a bit weird, and probably in a church, rather than, hang on, if God's asked me to operate in this environment, I kind of want to know He's there, that He's got something for me to do, and I'm going to need some help. Because if I rely completely on myself, I think I'm in trouble. So, I've seen His intervention in numerous ways, and even just sitting in a board meeting, which I do quite a bit of it these days. But right the way through, sitting in leadership meetings, client meetings, customer suppliers, all those different meetings. Sometimes they're not going that well, and often just becoming aware of His presence in the midst of that meeting, the environment changed, the atmospheres changed, the conversations change. Just inviting Him into interviewing someone to give me the insights, Lord. Is this the person that You've called to come here and help us do this role? So just that constant walk with Him during the day, talking with Him.
Oh, look, I'm glad I asked you that question to unpack that for us a little bit more, because that's a wonderful picture that you paint there. Mark, I want to turn now to some of the other work which fills a lot of your time these days. Another business that you founded, this time in 2015, Thought Patrol. What do you do with Thought Patrol? We mentioned a moment ago about leadership development. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
So this takes up the majority of my time now. So I work with leaders in various different guises. So I'm a strategist. I have an agile strategic planning process. So I've got a whole bunch of clients that I help with their strategic planning. I work with leaders, mainly business owners, sort of 50 to 100 million size business owners, so sort of mid-size companies, which I quite like that size. I put advisory boards together for companies as well. And also I take groups of business leaders away on retreats and help them train in a thing called Forum, which is a YPO. It's a secular organisation, the largest leadership organisation in the world. So I'm a trainer for them. I've been a member there for about 20 years, but also trained a lot of their top leaders and take them away on retreats to connect more deeply with each other, which is kind of an extraordinary privilege to sit at that table and help people connect. So the vast majority are not they're not Christian, and I like it like that. That's my natural space, is mixing it up with the commercial, the big commercial leaders. It's kind of my patch.
You mentioned there that a number of the people that you do work with aren't Christians. So
vast majority.
In what way, though?
So one or two Christians.
Vast majority of them. So in what way then does your faith flow through into the kind of leadership coaching that you bring?
Again, don't tend to bring out the Bible during the actual sessions because that just frightens people away. But look, I think I don't think about it a lot, other than it's just who I am. So my Christian faith is not a segmented part of who I am or what I do. It's a foundational piece. I mean, if it wasn't for Jesus' intervention, I wouldn't be here. So it's a foundational piece. It kind of leaks out on the advice that I give and the conversations that I have. Hopefully, the way that I treat and love those and serve those around me. It's not an overt Christian conversation, although I do get the opportunity to share some of my testimony and share life with a whole bunch of business leaders.
Can you give any stories or share any examples of times where the kind of coaching and development that you've been providing it's profoundly shaped by your Christian faith, and in particular the leadership example of Jesus, where that has been, I guess, evident to people and has created opportunities, perhaps even to speak into the primary motivation for how you seek to coach and guide people in their leadership development?
I had a nice one recently where I had a prospective client, and I said, look, here's some other clients, just give them a ring and have a chat and see, if it kind of works for you, that's great. And they rang one of my other clients, and they talked about, kind of what had gone on and how it all worked, and this person came on as a client, and then I heard later the conversation that these two had, and he said, "Oh, you need to know something." He's a Christian. He said, "I thought I saw something. There was kind of a bit of weird stuff in the background there." And he said, "Yeah, but it's okay. It's okay. What it means is he'll do what he said he's going to do, and he genuinely cares and wants you to succeed." And I thought, wow, okay, that's all right. I don't mind that. I think that's a level of engagement. No one says, let's get the Jesus freak in to teach us a few things. Like, it doesn't work like that. But they share stories. We've had businesses go from 50 to 100 million, open up in new international markets, and lots of sort of commercial success. That's what they hire you for. Being excellent at what you do, I think is it's one of we're told to develop our gifts and get very good at what we do. But when we are being authentic and being true to who God has created us to do, then we get to serve before kings. We get to engage in a way that we might not expect.
I love that story there, Mark, them talking behind your back about you being a Christian, but in a positive way. That's a lovely story. Look, Mark, you have encouraged us in so many ways already, but is there perhaps one final piece of encouragement that you would want to really highlight for the Christian listening to this about their daily work? What would that be? I
think the key revelation in my journey around being able to unlock some personal potential in the marketplace has been the fact that God's interested in our work, and it's something that people kind of may give intellectual assent to, or kind of resist as the big evil bad world, and we shouldn't be engaged in those things. But I only bump into a handful of people who genuinely recognise that he's interested in their work, and they move mountains. So taking the time to seek the Lord about whether he is genuinely interested or not in what you're doing day to day. I see a lot of Christians who have an experience of Christ and they want to serve, and their immediate thought is, I need to be a priest, a pastor, a missionary. And so we have this sort of artificial hierarchy of what we think a sacred calling or serving God looks like. But we're all anointed and appointed to an assignment. So letting him in and expecting to see him at work. So inviting him into the workplace, praying about your workplace and the people that are there, expecting him to move in your workplace, and getting that revelation that he is vitally and intimately interested in everything that you do every day. He's got every hair on your head. Every detail is important to him, and we spend more time at work than we do doing anything else. So we've given our life to him, and then that includes our work and our workplace.
Well, thank you, Mark. I love the way that you have encouraged us in this episode to invite God into all of the nitty-gritty of daily work life and be walking closely with him, and that he cares about it, that he is interested in it. There's been lots that you have given us to consider, and lots for us also to act upon, and also be encouraged as well by the wonderful testimony of God's work in your life generally, but also specifically your work life as well too. So Mark, thank you so much for your time and coming on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure, Andrew. Great to see you again.
Well, look, we have just one episode left in season 2 of the Life at Work Conference podcast, and it's a curly one that we've saved till last, titled You Can't Do That. We're going to talk to 2 Christian women who work in industries that some Christians might raise their eyebrows at, as we wrestle with questions around, are there jobs Christians can't do, and what happens when my ethics clash with my organisation? You don't want to miss that episode. But until next time, I'm Andrew Laird, and you've been listening to the Life at Work Conference podcast.
The Life at Work Conference podcast is produced by City Bible Forum. To find out more and register for the conference, go to citybibleforum.org/lifeatworkconference. Enjoyed this podcast? Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing and leaving a rating so others can find us too. Join us next time on the Life at Work Conference podcast with Andrew Laird.